Ja, god dag, kjære seere. Vi ønsker dere velkommen tilbake til Frikanalen, til Trond kvarter. I dag skal vi videreføre den debatten vi startet i vårt forrige program. Hovedtemaet er stadig spørsmål rundt staten Israel. Vi skal ta opp to måter å tenke på, to holdninger, to ideologier, kan vi kanskje si, som er knyttet til dette spørsmålet staten Israel og staten Israels karakter. Viktige tema. Det er nødvendig å være skolert og ha kunnskap om disse spørsmålene etter vår mening. Og vi overlater da den videre debatt, som i vårt forrige program, til debattanter, 4 debattanter på et større møte som nylig var holdt i London. Påstanden for diskusjonen på møtet var denne: Anti-Zionisme er antisemitisme. Det var påstanden som skulle diskuteres. Vi følger opp debatten her. Etter debatten så ble det holdt en avstemning blant de tilstedeværende på møtet, så følg med hva den avstemningen endte opp med. Her altså andre del av programmet om dette temaet. Vi kommer også tilbake med en tredje og avsluttende del. Så kjære seere, velkommen til oss. Følg gjerne med. Spennende, nødvendig og viktig tema. Zionisme, antisemitisme, antisemitisme. Viktige spørsmål. Følg oss gjerne her i Frikanalen. Og vi overlater den videre debatt til de 4 debattanter på møtet i London. Så følg med, kjære seere. Og kom gjerne tilbake til oss etter hvert igjen her, til oss i Frikanalen, Trond kvarter, sendinger hver kveld klokka 8 som nå. Velkommen til oss, men her altså debatten.
Our second speaker for the motion, Einat Wolf. And Einat has been a member of the Israeli Knesset for first Labour and then the Independence Party between 2010 and 2013. And she has written extensively on Zionism. Einat, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you. So, we seem to all agree that anti-Semitism is bad. Of course, educated, knowledgeable people are unlikely to be seduced by it because we know where it leads: Nazism, Auschwitz, and the gas chambers. But anti-Zionism does not appear to be in the same category. It appears to be good. We heard here that it is about supporting Palestinians, about fighting for human rights. Educated, knowledgeable, well-meaning people might support it. But the anti-Semitism we all acknowledge as bad, when it started, looked nothing like where it led. In fact, when you compare the beginnings of anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, the similarities are striking. Anti-Semitism began by creating a new collective designation for the same people, which rendered them different. In secular 19th century Europe, it was no longer Jews, but Semites. And it never was intended to mean anything but Jews. In the Soviet Union, who claimed to not notice different religions and peoples, Jews were designated as Zionists. And today, in the West, in the UK, Zionists, Zios. The designation is then described as having essential, immutable, loathsome qualities. In Christian Europe, we were Christ killers. To the Nazis, we were an impure race. To the Soviets, we were capitalists and imperialists. And today, the state of Israel is the ultimate violator of human rights. It is described as born in sin. It is guilty by its very nature of the crimes of racism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, Nazism, genocide. The designation of the group and ascribing of essential evil qualities is always given the aura of rationality and respectability by relying on the greatest source of authority of a given era: religion in pre-modern times, science in the modern era, human rights in our own. The aura of the greatest authority is necessary because the collective transformation of the Jews into a loathsome other requires that one be willing to twist reality, if not outright ignore it. It is only by appealing to the authority of religious doctrine that all Jews living in the 12th century could be collectively designated as the killers of Christ over 1,000 years earlier. It is only by appealing to the authority of a perverted science that the very Jews who contributed to European society could suddenly be considered as endangering its racial purity. And it is only by appealing to a perverted version of human rights that Zionism and Israel could be designated as its greatest violators. It is only by perverting the idea of human rights that those who were actually ethnically cleansed from every part of the Arab world could be accused of ethnic cleansing. It is only through this sort of perversion that the people who repeatedly said yes to partitioning the land into a Jewish state and a Palestinian state could be described as those who stand in the way of a two-state solution. And it is only through this perversion that in an age when the idea of the nation is still tied for almost all states to the idea of a common history, language, ethnicity, and remnants of religion, Israel is singled out as uniquely deviant. But why go to all that effort to single out a group and distort reality? Because we humans have a primal need for scapegoats. And for whatever reason, my people have been the designated scapegoats for so many and for so long. For medieval Christianity, we stood between a brutish and nasty world and salvation. For Germany, for Europe, we stood between them and glory. For Stalin, we stood in the way of communist utopia. And today, why bother fighting colonialism and its aftermath? Easier to designate Zionists as colonialists and blame them. Why do the hard work of fighting racism and its many manifestations across all societies? Easier to designate Zionism as racism and apartheid and blame it. Why acknowledge the tremendous difficulties of living up to the ideals of human rights? Designate Zionism and Israel as its greatest violators and blame them. But the problem with human scapegoats is that unlike ancient animal ones, humans might resist their sacrifice a bit more. And we can't have that happen, can we? So action must be taken to reduce their resistance. How? Strip them of their defenses. Push them to the margins. Step by step, take away that which protects them. But it must be done gradually. Anti-Semitism did not start by stripping Jews of their citizenship, confiscating their assets, and pushing them into ghettos. It started by slowly pushing Jews out of the positions they were able to attain after several decades of European emancipation. It operated by making it more and more difficult for Jews to feel comfortable in European society. Anti-Semitism also lured Jews into dropping their defenses, preventing them from organizing against the coming danger, telling them that if they were the good kind of Jew, for example, in Germany, those who fought for Germany in World War I, they would be spared. They were not. Note how anti-Zionism operates now. Its main targets are the two places where Jews have organized most effectively for their defense: the State of Israel and the pro-Israel lobby in the US. The legitimacy of both is relentlessly and uniquely questioned. Jews, now designated as Zionists, are increasingly pushed out of certain spaces. Jewish students in the US are slowly pulling out of universities known for their virulent anti-Zionism. Liberal activist Jews are finding they are increasingly unwelcome in progressive circles. Jews here in Britain are finding they can no longer be in the Labour Party, their traditional political home, wondering if they might one day have to leave the country altogether. Anti-Zionism also lures Jews to give up their defenses. We heard it here. Why don't we all live together in a single state? Yes, we know that nowhere in the Arab world have Jews ever been treated as equals and were violently ethnically cleansed when they dared raise their heads. Yes, we know that binational states, certainly in this region, but not only, descend into bloody mayhem. But we assure you, this one will work. Just forgo your insistence on having your own state where you control your defense. Anti-Zionists also insist on their respectability. They will try to convince you that the fact that the targets of this new form of virulent hatred bear a striking resemblance to those who were targets in previous times is sheer coincidence. They will insist that the fact that the charges against this group appear like variations on the ancient themes of anti-Semitism is sheer coincidence. They might even convince you they are fighting anti-Semitism, but the old, easy-to-identify kind, which we already know is bad. And this is where it all comes together. In the past, waves of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism did not arise from something that those who were hated actually did. It arose from a crisis in the society of those doing the hating. And in an age of crisis, especially a crisis of identity, when we're no longer sure who we are, what we stand for, we desperately need certainties. And there are few greater certainties in this world than that the Jews did it. And so the Zionists are designated as a collective group, which happens to coincide with the group previously known as Semites and Jews. They are then ascribed the most loathsome qualities of our time by appealing to the great authority of our era, and then they are slowly subject to a process designed to strip them of the means of resisting their ultimate role as scapegoats for the crisis of the era. And when that process would be complete, the scapegoat could finally be sacrificed in the vain hope that in doing so a better world would emerge. It never does. And this is why the topic of this debate is not just another topic. It raises the very specter that we might be a society on the precipice, which is why we are here today, in the hope that some of you will see the deep, insidious undercurrents, so that this time we will not have to wait to see where anti-Zionism leads, and only then look back in hindsight and say, ah, yes, that rising wave of anti-Zionism was indeed the new form of anti-Semitism.
Aina, thank you. And to our final speaker, who is our second speaker against the motion, Mehdi Hassan. Mehdi is a journalist, a broadcaster, a prominent critic of Israel. He's a host on Al Jazeera English, and he's a columnist on the US online magazine, The Intercept. Mehdi, the floor is yours for 10.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been witnessing tonight a deeply cynical proposition deliver a farrago of straw men, distortions, deflections, false accusations, and of course, straight up pro-Israel propaganda. Then again, hearing Melanie Phillips come here and champion the rights of gays in Israel in order to defend Zionism was well worth the entry ticket in and of itself. So let's be clear about what this motion is tonight, because it's the motion you all have to vote on in good conscience. The motion says, quote, "Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It doesn't say some anti-Zionists are anti-Semites, which is true. It doesn't say anti-Zionism can sometimes turn into anti-Semitism, which is true. It doesn't say that anti-Semites often use anti-Zionism as cover, as an excuse for their bigotry and racism, which is true. I wouldn't oppose any of that. But that's not what the motion says. The motion says, ridiculously, sweepingly, offensively, ahistorically, that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That merely being opposed to Zionism, a political ideology, remember, is inherently, by definition, ipso facto, anti-Semitic, which is absurd. Think about the implications of voting for that tonight. You'd be saying every anti-Zionist is a bigot, a racist, and an anti-Semite by definition. Even the many Jewish and Israeli anti-Zionists. So Elam, Jewish historian, born and raised in Israel, served in the Israeli military. He's an anti-Semite. That's what they want you to believe. That's what they want you to vote for tonight. So is the former Speaker of Israel's own parliament, the Knesset, Avraham Berg. Melanie would say he's a self-hating Jew. So is my Intercept colleague, Naomi Klein, the acclaimed author and climate change activist. So is Noam Chomsky. He's an anti-Semite as well. They want you to vote for them and say that the thousands of Haredi, ultra-Orthodox, anti-Zionist Jews who oppose Zionism for religious theological reasons, they're anti-Semites too. That's what they want. That is what they are asking you to vote for tonight. It's absurd and it's ahistorical. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the 35 top Israeli Jewish scholars and academics, historians of the Holocaust, who came together just a few months ago and published an open letter in which they wrote, and I quote, "Many victims of the Holocaust opposed Zionism. On the other hand, many anti-Semites supported Zionism. It is nonsensical and inappropriate to identify anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism." End quote. Are they anti-Semites too? Really? All 35 of them? By the way, in terms of the history they refer to in their letter, it is an undeniable, indisputable fact that many, many European anti-Semites, as Ilan alluded to, did support Zionism at the outset. They did embrace the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, because for their own selfish racist reasons, they shared his goal of treating Jews as a foreign, separate nation and getting them out of Europe. Take British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, author of the 1917 Balfour Declaration, in favor of Zionism. Balfour dismissed Jews as, quote, an alien and hostile people. He sponsored legislation to keep Jewish refugees out of the UK. The only Jewish member of the cabinet at that time, Sir Edwin Samuel Montagu, opposed the Balfour Declaration and called Zionism a mischievous political creed. Yet apparently, according to the proposition tonight, Montagu's the anti-Semite and Balfour isn't. That's the madness that you're going to vote for tonight. This motion is not just ahistorical, not just absurd, not just offensive. It's a distraction. It's a dangerous distraction from the very real and murderous anti-Semitism that is on the rise, and that comes not from the left, not from anti-Zionists, not from the BDS movement, as Melanie would have you believe, but from a resurgent far right. In Germany, according to official figures, in 2017, 9 out of 10 anti-Semitic hate crimes were carried out by far right or neo-Nazi groups. I live in the US. 2 synagogue attacks in the space of 6 months. 12 innocent Jewish worshippers murdered in cold blood by far-right white nationalists. And yet the proposition tonight, like the Netanyahu government, like the Trump administration, want you to ludicrously believe that the threat to Jews right now, the real rise in the new anti-Semitism, comes from the anti-Zionists, from the BDS movement, from the Palestinians, and not from the murderous far right. When the irony is that Netanyahu, Prime Minister of the world's only Jewish state, has been cozying up to some of the worst anti-Semites on the right, who also happen to be proud Zionists. Let's be clear about that. Many of the most prominent, influential, right-wing anti-Semites today, Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, Steve Bannon, they're not anti-Zionists, they're hard-right, hardcore Zionists and pals of Netanyahu. Let's also just deal with some of the canards we've heard tonight from the proposition. Einat mentioned that it's anti-Semitic to suggest Israel is born in sin. Every black American I know says to me and says to everyone else that the United States was born in sin. Slavery was a sin at the start of the United States. No one accuses them of being anti-white racists or anti-American racists. It's just a statement of historical fact. They say the proposition that when you oppose Zionism, you're denying Jews and no one else a right to self-determination, which is just flat false. Not every nation or ethnic group wants a state, gets a state, has a state. Ask the Kurds, ask the Catalans, ask the Scots. There are more than 5,000 ethnic groups in the world today, but only 193 member states at the United Nations. Take the Druze, an Arab ethnic minority group. 100,000 or so live in Israel. Do they have a right to self-determination? If they create a Druze state inside of Israel, is Einat okay with that? If Einat says, no, you can't have a Druze state, is she racist towards the Druze? National self-determination doesn't always correspond with statehood. Melanie says, it's not racist for the Kurds to aspire to statehood. She's right, it's not. But the flip side of that is true as well. The British government, the American government, most of the EU governments do not support Kurdish statehood. Does that mean the British government, all of us, are racist towards the Kurds? People have legitimate debates about where state lines should be drawn, which states should be created, how those states exist. It's not racism or bigotry to have that legitimate debate. It can be, but it's not by definition. The issue is not whether Jews deserve a homeland or have a historic connection to the land of Palestine. Of course they do. The issue is whether those historic and religious claims justify creating and expanding a Jewish majority state in which one ethnic group is privileged over another, while another group is permanently disenfranchised, dispossessed, and subjected to endless military occupation. That's what we're here to oppose tonight. Nothing more, nothing less. And has the proposition even stopped to ask what it means to say to that oppressed group, the Palestinian people, to say to them that you're either a Zionist, you either subscribe to the ideology of your oppressor, or you're a racist? What kind of choice is that? Melanie says tonight that denying Jewish nationhood is racist, it's anti-Semitic. And yet she has no issue erasing the Palestinian people from the face of the planet. She said in her speech that only the Jews have a unique right to nationhood and statehood in that part of the world, not the Palestinians. What is that? Is that not bigotry? Is that not racism? Is that not wiping a people off the face of the planet? But this is what you'll be voting for tonight, if you vote for the proposition. This is what the Israeli, pro-Israeli argument has always been: to silence the Palestinians, to silence their opposition to occupation, to silence their resistance as Palestinian citizens living inside of Israel to a nationalistic ideology which treats them like second-class citizens, which denies them many of the rights and privileges of the majority. And one thing I want to make clear to you tonight: you don't have to be an anti-Zionist to vote with me and Ilan tonight. You don't even have to be a critic of Israel. You can be the biggest supporter of Israel in the world and vote with the opposition. All you have to be is someone who recognizes that it is an egregious smear, a naked slur, to claim, to label those of us, Jews and non-Jews alike, who oppose a political ideology in good faith because we think it's unjust, iniquitous, oppressive, to label us as anti-Semites for holding that political view. All you have to be is someone who recognizes that the claim that we hate or are opposed to Jews simply because we don't agree with the idea of a state that privileges one group over another makes us racists. So let me repeat, to be clear, tonight's debate is not about Israel per se. It's not about whether you support or oppose Israel or the occupation. It's about whether you believe the proposition have made the case that those of us who oppose Israel in its current form, who oppose the political ideology underpinning it, that we're racists. That's the bar that has to be crossed tonight. It's that simple. And I'll tell you this for free. Those of us who value our free speech, who don't want to see anti-Semitism cynically weaponized by supporters of Israel, who oppose that ideology of Zionism in good faith with good reason, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not be silenced. We will not be bullied. We will not be cowed. We will not be smeared. So, ladies and gentlemen, stand with us against this unjust, inaccurate, irresponsible, dishonest, ludicrous, simplistic, sweeping motion which conflates Judaism, a great and ancient religion, with Zionism, a very modern political ideology, and in doing so risks emptying anti-Semitism of all meaning. Ladies and gentlemen, stand with us tonight. Oppose this awful motion.
Ja, kjære seere, dette var del 2 altså, av den debatten vi viderefører nå etter hvert. Dette gjelder Israel, viktige tenkemåter, ideologier knyttet til staten Israel, sionisme, anti-Zionisme, anti-Semitisme. Er det noen bånd mellom disse, og i så fall hvilke? Vi overfører altså en debatt som for en tid tilbake ble holdt på et stort møte i London. 4 aktuelle, dyktige, må vi kunne si, debattanter som berører disse ideologiske spørsmålene. Vi sendte nå del 2. Del 1 er nylig sendt her hos oss. Bla den gjerne opp og se den også. For øvrig avslutter vi med en 3. del om en dag eller 2. Så følg oss gjerne her, Frikanalen, Trond Alis kvarter. Velkommen tilbake til oss.